Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
podcast for parents and families everywhere.
Whether you have kids that plan to attend college or you have current college students, you want them in and you want them to graduate.
You want a quality education that will give you a skill set that will make you marketable for the jobs of today and the jobs of tomorrow. I am Mark Stucker, and I'm a college coach from Metro Atlanta.
And I am Anika Madden, and I am a parent, also from Atlanta, currently in North Carolina.
And I'm David Williams, and I'm a dad from Chicago, Illinois.
This week in the news, the mess that is elite college admissions, a continuation of our article by Jason England of Vox. Mark and Anika will continue the bonus content on character traits admission officers value. Our question from a listener are, what are some red flags when you're looking at a college that should signal to you that this is not the school for you? Our interview is part 2 of 6 from Julia Esquivel, the Milton Academy College Counselor, on how to work more effectively with your school counselor. And there will be no college spotlight this week.
And friends, we're going to dive right into admissions tip and admission vernacular. So, first of all, the Common App has 7 prompts, and they normally come out late January. This year, they just came out yesterday. And for the last 3 years, they've stayed the same. This year, there is a new prompt. So the new Common App essay prompt, they dumped the rarely used question about solving a problem, and they have replaced it with reflect on something that someone has done for you that has made you happy or thankful in a surprising way. How has this gratitude affected or motivated you? And the tip is you can start that now. You know, I'm talking to current juniors, you know, the class of 2022. You know that you're going to have 7 questions, what they are. Take the next 6 months and get this done before you start your senior year. That's the tip. All right, Dave, I got a hard one for you, man. I was going to tell you right now, this is tough. You ready, man? Because you got differently abled last week, so I had to up my game. All right, here's the challenge. The term is zeroing out. What is zeroing out?
Zeroing out. Zeroing out.
I'm going to give you a hint. You may as well not even guess if you don't know.
Okay, wait. Let me give one shot. Okay.
You're a competitor. I'll give you that.
It means where you want to perfectly match your acceptances with the people who, with your yield rate. I don't know.
No, nice try. So I'm going to explain it by way of example. So when I was doing boarding school college counseling, just like Julia is our interview for the next few weeks, the college counselor at a boarding school, you know, we had all these schools that we would send kids to because we knew they would consistently take our kids. You know, these were schools. Now, remember, this is 20 years ago, so it's gotten a lot more competitive. But some of the schools that pretty much would take our C students were schools like Gettysburg, Franklin and Marshall, American University, and Northeastern. Those are 4 that I come to mind right away. We could send our C or C plus student there, or our, A or A minus or B plus student that wants a balanced list. And those are like the probables. And then, so, when we had this thing where we had a board and all the people would put the names of the schools on the board where they got in. So you'd see like 20, 25, 30 names for a class of 100 for some of these places. But what would happen is very few of them would go because they're mostly using it as their backup. And so what happens is after a school realizes we're not getting any yield, we keep taking a bunch of kids and they don't come. All of a sudden, bang, we're just getting 30 acceptance. Like, what happened? They took 2 kids to send us a message. Stop treating me as a backup. So that's what's called zeroing you out. Zero means they shut you out totally. You get nobody in.
That's right, man. Got tired of
and it worked. By the way,
at the bar.
Exactly. But you know what? I hate to say it, it works. Because you realize, okay, if I'm going to do business with you, I got to up my game and either send better students or send students that are going to come. You got a choice. If I value you as a partner, I need to either get some matches so you can see that I'm giving you your respect. Otherwise, what's that Aretha Franklin song? No respect. Yep.
R-E-S-P-E-C-T. That is what you mean to me.
Okay.
R-E-S-P-E-C-T. Respect, baby.
Let's leave the scene to her, okay? All right, Dave. So before we dive into the article, let me just say a little something. So we had said we're going to make this a 4-parter. We're actually going to make it a 3-parter for 2 reasons. One, a lot of the 4 points that are left, we have touched on other times. And also, I realized one thing, when you make something a 4-parter, you have this backlog of these incredible articles you can't get to. So we've got these incredible articles that we can't wait to just share with you guys. So we're going to do points 5, 6, 7, and 8 and wrap this article up. So take it away, Dave. Let's turn to college hot topics in the news.
All right, well, let's first do a very, very quick review of the first 4 points. It's the article, The Mess That Is Elite College Admissions, explaining a former dean's perspective, Jason England of Vox. His first point was that the ways the wealthy game the system are remarkably mundane. He talked about how early decision really favors the wealthy and the well-prepared. Number 2, he talked about when it comes to elite college admissions, that private schools reigned supreme. The public schools just couldn't compete with private schools when it came to elite counselors, tutors, essay writers, and the way that elite private schools can manipulate their school profile to get better advantages with the elite colleges. Number 3, he talked about the fact that standardized testing is extremely problematic and very contingent on person's wealth. And he said, quote, in practice, test scores, class rank, and private schooling reign supreme over all other holistic criteria. And number 4, we talked about the fact that men have an unfair advantage over women, not just demographically. There's just so many more qualified women applying to college these days, but also how Division III athletics and sports such as squash and polo and water polo and horseback riding tends to give an unfair demographic advantage, particularly to the white male athlete. So let's dive into number 5.
Yeah, now let me just say one last thing, Dave. One thing. So basically what he's saying these are the things I wish people knew about the way it really worked. And so that's kind of, and later on he says, you know what? I'm done with it. I left. There were too many inequities. I couldn't handle it anymore. And he actually left and became a college professor, but that's neither here nor there. So let's handle these last 4, Dave.
Well, the last 5, I'm going to let you talk about this because you have railed against this point since the start of the podcast. And that is that rankings are arbitrary, misleading, and poisonous. And I'll tee you off by the most egregious perpetrator of this malfeasance, and that is U.S. News and World Report. Take it away, Mark.
Yeah, so one of the things he mentions here that I like, he says, the college rankings are a capitalistic undertaking rooted in junk science. Yeah. And then he goes on to say, why would you want to fall victim to the grifters out there who are waiting to prey on your sense of insecurity? And so here's what I want to say about this. There is an exploitation element to the rankings. So one of the things about the rankings people don't realize is, why do they tweak the rankings a little bit every year? To sell more magazines. It's a complete capitalistic venture. They tweak them a little bit every year. Oh, this is different so that they can sell magazines the following year. And that's exactly why they do it, before that tweaking. And so let's say that they did the rankings with their numbers and their formula, and it came out. I'm just making this up. UC Davis was number 1. Okay. They would not run with that because there's some intentional manipulation. A while ago, it came out who the editors to U.S. News and World Report were and how they intentionally were making sure the colleges that either they went to or their kids went to were number 1. They would rerun the numbers. And that goes back to what we talked about, how the wealthy make the rules in such a way to declare themselves the winners. A while ago, one of my former students, another Anika, she went on to go into college admissions, and we met for lunch in Atlanta. And I was saying, Anika, did you see all the schools that got caught, busted fabricating the rankings? And that year, there was a bunch that got caught in the same year. It's like Wake Forest and George Washington and several. There were like 4. And her response was, I'm surprised there's so few that got caught. Mark, that's so rampant. That's so widespread. Like, this is a high stakes game. It's pretty commonly known that there's some manipulation going on here. So here's my last point I want to make, because we talked about rankings a lot. I just want to make a few more points and move on. How would you feel, Dave, if instead of you getting to pick Frida as your wife, you had to have Andrew or Michael or Kim, these are all Dave's siblings, pick who your future spouse would be? Would you rather that be the case, or your mom or your dad? Or would you rather have that choice yourself?
Oh, I think I'd rather have my choice myself. That all seems so quasi-Freudian to me.
So here's where I'm going with this. You know, when you accept the rankings as gospel, what you're doing is you are applying somebody else's standards of beauty as to who is a good match for your personality, your temperament, what you value, and who you want to marry for the next 4 years. I'm stretching the marry example a little bit. Marry as in stay at the college for the 4 years, right? You're outsourcing your ability to decide what is beautiful to you and what matches with you to somebody else. Why would you want to do that? Let me try to make this more concrete. What if a school is ranked extremely high, but it was in the heart of the city, and you're not someone who wants to attend a city school? What if a school is ranked extremely high, like a Wellesley or Spelman or a Barnard, but you don't want to go to a women's college, you want a co-ed school? What if a school is ranked very high, like a Williams or a Northwestern or a U Chicago or University of Michigan, and you're like me, you're a weather weenie. You die when it's cold. Cold weather just repels you. What if a school's ranked really high, like a Washington and Lee, but you don't want to attend a school that's that conservative? You don't want to be around so many Trump supporters. What if a school is ranked really high, like a Haverford College, but you would die at a school that has less students than your own high school has? What if a school is ranked very high, but they don't even offer the major you're interested in studying? For all these reasons, I say, don't use the rankings as your matchmaker to pick which college you will marry for the next 4 years. Use your own criteria, and you create your own personal rankings. And that's why my challenge there on that. So we've talked about rankings before. I don't want to say much more other than to say that they're highly, highly subjective. Why is it that churches aren't ranked? Imagine if there was a ranking of churches. You'd say, come on, that's ridiculous. Some churches are more contemplative, more reflective. Some are more charismatic, and people like to express themselves. How could you possibly rank churches? Well, ranking colleges is a lot like ranking churches. Just like churches have to be a certain kind of fit for your style of worship, that's how colleges should be. So don't accept that. Now, I will say this. It's a little different looking at rankings in individual majors. That's a little different. There's still a lot of subjectivity there, but nowhere near as much subjectivity. If you're looking at who's got the best computer science program or the best program in dance or something like that, that's a little different than putting the whole concoction together. Let's move on to the next one, Dave.
Well, and to put it in real terms, imagine if they ranked cars and you were a sports car, but they ranked an SUV or a minivan, or you wanted a electric car and Tesla, and they ranked a internal combustion engine. Would you think that that was relevant to you? No. If you want a Tesla, man, you go out and get a Tesla. You don't have to get a Ferrari. Anyways.
Just so the first-time listeners, Dave has to work Tesla into the podcast once a month at least. Just get his Tesla off his chest. So I just let him do it. I just let him do his thing.
Now I've got to figure out how to work in Bitcoin.
Or BIPOC.
or BIPOC. All
right, let's go. Number 6.
The next one is a quote from one of the greatest Westerns of all time. It is when Clint Eastwood sends to Gene Hackman when he's about to blow his head off, and he says, "I don't deserve this." And Clint Eastwood growls back, "Deserve has got nothing to do with it." And that's this title. Deserve has got nothing to do with it. And what he says is, quote, "Our cultural standards for what it means to earn or deserve something are extremely subjective and flexible. It is difficult to get anyone to acknowledge the luck of birth and circumstance." What say you, Mark?
Yeah, so this is the point that I brought up last week, where I say the wealthy write the rules in such a way to declare themselves the winners. Here's what he says. The wealthy define deserve to ensure that their self-interest is disguised as the greater good. The wealthy teach the middle class the checklist for college admission success. And so what does that practically mean? I'll give you some examples. Here are a bunch of things that could all be in the rankings. But if they were, they wouldn't advantage the wealthy, so they're not. So you could take a look at whether you come from a school that has a very high counselor to student ratio. Let's say 450 to 1, 480 to 4. The national average ranges from 430 to 480 to 1. And you could give student bonus points for excelling in an environment where they don't have great one-on-one counseling. You could also look at things like what's the level of poverty at the school, and you could give them bonus points in how you evaluate them. You could look at whether a school has a low percentage of teachers that have masters and PhDs, and you can say, look, if this kid is getting these kinds of scores on APs with teachers without as much training, we're going to give them extra points. You could give bonus points to kids from single parent homes. But these are all things that would never happen because you would not be advantaging the people that the system is designed to advantage. And so that's really what he's getting at is there's so many built-in things that advantage the advantage. And then here's a quote that he says, and I do want to read this because I thought it's pretty profound. He says, in other words, it's very difficult to get anyone to acknowledge the luck of birth and circumstance. To do so undermines a key cog in the American dream machine, the myth of the self-made man, which reduces wealthy children's built-in advantages to irrelevant biological footnotes while transforming others' disadvantages to their personal faults. He says it's very difficult to get those on the short end of the stick to see that diligence and acumen can take you only so far. They internalize failure and they seek out scapegoats. And then he has an example. The example he says is the black kid stole my spot. So I think we've said enough there. Let's move on to number 7.
The 7th point has really been so well encapsulated into a book that we're going to recommend again. And the 7th point is where you go to college doesn't define you or guarantee your future. And for that, Mark, I want to re-reference the Frank Bruni book, Where You Go Is Not... Oh, I forgot the title.
No, you got it. You got it right. Where you'll go is not who you'll be.
Where you
got
go
it right.
is not who you'll be. That's correct. I didn't want to butcher such a great book. but Mark, why don't you give a synopsis?
Yeah, so it's a strong book. I strongly recommend. Bruni's I believe he's got a Pulitzer, but he writes the New York Times. Basically goes through, he takes a look at all kinds of different people who we would think of as successful. Whether it's things like Fulbright scholars and Pulitzer Prize winners and Rhodes scholars, and he looks at things like CEOs and a whole list of different things. And then he looks at where they went to college. And while you see some of the elite schools there, it's shocking how many of them don't come to elite schools. And he makes the connection that this fixation we have with where you went to school and the correlation with life success just doesn't bear the reality. And so it's a very comforting book. I think it can really take a lot of the pressure off of kids. So it's a book that Dave and I, recommend that everybody reads. Now, I'll tell you something. As soon as I get done this podcast today, I'm doing another podcast. I'm a guest on another podcast. And it's podcast is a student, a high school student. She started her own college podcast out of Maryland. And doing a pre-meeting with her, she's a listener of our podcast. She's like, my podcast is geared to the people at my school who are obsessed with trying to go to a top 20 college. It's like their life mission, she said. And that is so unhealthy. And I'm coming on. I said, I'm be happy to come on and address that. So I'm going from this to right to that, Dave, as soon as we get out of here to be a guest to address that issue, because that is so psychologically unhealthy. And it's also so detached from the reality of this world. And, I want to say something again about College Confidential, because I spoke out about College Confidential a while ago and got some blowback. Some people spoke up. I was like, it's not that bad. I find it helpful. So it's analogy time. Suppose you're on treasure hunting. You're out in the woods and you turn around and you find a $50 bill. Man, this is pretty good. And turn around again. There's a $100 bill. Wow. Next thing you know, there's a couple $100 bills. Then you turn around a tree and somebody stabs you right in the gut with a knife. That's how I see College Confidential. There are treasures there. There are jewels there. I would not ever dismiss the fact that there's some valuable intel there. But here's why I feel so strongly about it not being healthy. the overall message from those message boards is if you don't go to a top 20 or 30 school, one of the 1%ers, then you're a loser. And your life is not going to be on the same trajectory for success. And so what I see it doing is beating kids up, not making them feel good about themselves, and not being good for people's mental health. And so that's why I'm so critical of it. This is a time to me when so many things are attacking our kids' self-esteem. And we want our kids to walk around with confidence. And I see the opposite happening with the people that frequent that message board because of the toxicity, and the whole context is, what are you going to do to get into one of these super elite schools? And, and that's the whole context. And there's a comparison thing, which Dave addressed last week, runs rampant on that website. So that's why I'm not a fan. So yeah, I acknowledge there's some nuggets there, but is it worth your $100 bill, your $200 bills to get stabbed in the chest? I don't think so. I want to read a letter that one of our listeners sent in. Her name is Jessica. And just so you know, I don't want you to think if you send a letter and else we just put you on blast and throw it out there. So obviously I got her permission to read this. And this was right after episode 154 went live. So it was about 7 weeks ago. And I asked for permission. I've just been waiting for the opportune time to read it. And I think this is a good time. So here's what Jessica says. And I'm not going to say we never say last names, but I'm also not going to say her state because she does say some personal things in here. But if I leave the state out, she could be any Jessica in the world, right? So here's what she says. I was so happy to hear your very astute comments on the recent podcast, episode 154, regarding the disproportionate focus on elite college admissions. So much of the anxiety and the stress students and parents feel about the process could be alleviated if we had a more honest picture of the broader college admissions landscape and the great value to be found in less selective admissions. And if we reminded ourselves that there's more to our own self-worth than what school our kids got into, then Dave, she shouts you out, man. Gotta give you your props, dude. She says, Dave's comments about the fact that the vast majority of colleges in the U.S. are what would be considered less or non-competitive in the admissions really hit home for me. I was so worried about my 12th grade son's chances because his academic record is not really that strong. However, once I got out of the top rankings mindset, I personally, she says in parentheses, I personally went to one of those top 20 and Ivy League schools myself, both for undergrad and for grad school. But once I got out of that, I realized the wealth of opportunities that are out there for my son. He could really focus on what was the best school for his profile, for his interests, not what someone else thought was the best school. Now we are very, very happy about his prospects at a number of schools where we know he has a good chance of acceptance and we know he will most likely thrive. And then she says, further, for his sister, who's now entering high school and is an academic rock star, I think my approach will still be different in terms of the range of schools she should explore. We might find that she's going to be happiest, not necessarily with the most competitive school. Love the podcast. Keep up the work. Keep up the good work. So well said. Thank you so much for sharing that, Jessica. And Dave, good job, my friend. You hit that point home.
Well, yeah, the other thing I'd like to add is one podcast that I listen to a lot other than this, you should turn me on, is the Bigger Pockets Real Estate. You know, Mark, I have a big interest and stake in real estate. And it really drives home that for so much of entrepreneurs, college is an afterthought. And for many of these kids who are just hitting it out the park in real estate, some of them have never even finished college. And the attributes that they need to be successful have nothing to do with the admission criteria for getting into these elite colleges. In fact, one of my mentors was an Irish bricklayer who started laying brick in Chicago 25, 30 years ago and now has a net worth well over $40 million and owns all these apartment buildings. And so character and work ethic and vision and personality and salesmanship and all these things that are so important to entrepreneurial success have absolutely nothing to do with what we consider college admission criteria. And it's important to keep that in mind. In fact, I would recommend people just listening to a Bigger Pockets because it just gives you the perspective that the keys to success in life are so varied and so often not found in anything related to the whole college admissions. Not to say that college is not important, but the arcane criteria that we are using to get kids into this small, select group of colleges have so little relevance to the criteria for success in most of life. We got to keep that in perspective.
Thanks, David. That's a good segue because, Anika and I talked about character. Well, we talked about character and bonus content last week, and we're talking about character again and bonus content this week. So Anika and I will pick that up. But let's make the last point.
The last point, the job of a college counselor or a college admissions officer isn't easy. And admissions officers do a lot of thankless work. So, Mark, you were involved in the mix. You know how the sausage is made. Let's talk to the factory worker and tell me how tough this job really is.
Well, the job is tough, but it's incredibly rewarding, And I'm really glad he ended with this point because, if you listen to all his points about the inequities of college admissions, you really could come away thinking, man, that sounds like a snake oil salesman. That sounds like the worst used car salesman. Who would ever want to do that? And he makes the point of how much respect he has for admission officers. Here's a quote. He says, to foist the task of remedying societal inequity on relatively underpaid, underappreciated admissions officers is unfair. He said, I had a huge office, a fancy title, lots of frequent flyer miles, but the salary was peanuts. And he goes on to say that's one reason the field has a disproportionate number of women and minorities in high ranking positions. And then he goes on to say, I wasn't able to make the level of change that I felt needed to be made. So I eventually left, but I have tremendous respect for what people do. And that's how I feel. I feel like it is like God's work you're doing. Like, I try so hard to get people excited about admissions. I know it's not for everybody, but if a kid was to come home and say to their parent, look, I'd love to be on the Supreme Court, or I want to be a cardiologist or something like that, people would get really excited. Wow, look at that. My kid wants to do something great. That's how I feel about it. If somebody wants to be an admission officer, like you're changing lives. You really, really are, by who you admit and who you bring into a community and who you give these opportunities to. And it can be an incredibly fulfilling work. Particularly if you love kids and you love working with students. And so most people, they're swimming upstream because these structural inequities are built in, and they're absolutely doing their best to help kids and give kids opportunities. And it can be an incredibly rewarding, incredibly fulfilling job, but it is a lot of work, and people work a lot of hours for, you're not making six figures unless you're more on the executive level. And even that's not even true at some smaller under-resourced schools. So God bless everybody out there who's in the trenches doing their best to help kids. The best admission officers, they don't see themselves as salespeople. They see themselves as counselors who are just trying to get a kid on their path, whether it's at their school or not. Those are the best ones. And God bless them. May their tribe increase.
Awesome. Well, let's put a bow on this article. I think it was a very, very, very well thought out article and gives a lot of grist for the thinking.
Now it's time for our step-by-step walkthrough of the college admissions process.
Okay, Anika, we are in our countdown. We are looking at the top 10 colleges for producing CEOs at Fortune 500 companies. And the top 10 is turning into be the top 18 because 8 people are tied at number 10 with 5 CEOs as based on a 2018 study. So 2 weeks ago, we had Yale and New Haven. Last week, we had Illinois and Champaign. This week, we have Bucknell University in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. Ever heard of Bucknell?
I have heard of it. I didn't know where it was, but I've heard of it.
But yeah, it's a beautiful campus, right there. Okay. Good old PA. So coming in at 5. And I should give a shout out to some of these smaller schools on the list that it's kind of more impressive when the smaller schools like Bucknell have, the CEOs compared to some of the ones that are going to be on here that have like 30, 40, 50,000 kids. But shout out to Bucknell. And next week we still have 5 more tied at number 10.
Okay.
All right. So transitioning, we are going to just make a couple points about our book chapter today because the book chapter, it's got a title of something Dave and I have been talking about a lot. It's called What is Affirmative Action for Rich Kids? And we've been talking about that a lot, so I don't want to dwell on it too much, but I want to just make a couple points, and then we're going to actually resume our bonus content. So I want to make a couple points that Dave and I haven't emphasized as much. And so a lot of the impetus for this title of this chapter came from an article by Kim Clark in Time magazine. And the name of her article was called Many Colleges Offer Affirmative Action for Rich and Powerful. And so that was some of the impetus. And then there was also another really good article in Forbes by Maggie McGrath called The Invisible Force Behind College Admissions. And this talks about firms like Noel Levitt's, who's probably the most famous one. And basically what they do is they come up with ways for colleges to get more tuition out of each kid. And so what it involves is doing these very elaborate statistical models that they run where they figure out and study, okay, people in this wealthy neighborhood, if you give them X amount of a merit scholarship, then they're likely to come. So if you give them, they'll do research that'll say if you gave them $5,300 in a merit scholarship, they won't come. But if you up it to $6,900, then you go from 31% of people accepting your offer to 71% of people accepting your offer. And it shows the kind of underbelly behind the scenes of how a lot of decisions are actually made as to who actually gets merit scholarships. And so here's a quote from the chapter, and it says, "Today, these tuition discounts usually come in the guise of merit scholarships. But often the students who get them are hardly the best and the brightest. For example, 10% of college admissions directors at four-year colleges and almost 20% at private liberal arts colleges admit that they give their affluent students a significant leg up in the admission process, meaning that they are admitting affluent students with lower grades and lower test scores than other applicants. Indeed, nearly a fifth of all students receiving so-called merit scholarships have less than a B average. And largely overlapping 19% have mediocre SAT scores. And that's according to a report by the National Center for Educational Statistics. So basically, this chapter talks about how schools need tuition revenue. Not all schools. You don't find this with the most selective, but ones that are less selective, but they need tuition revenue to pay their bills, intentionally targeting affluent students by giving them merit scholarships at the expense and passing over students that have stronger academic profiles because they need their money. And so I just wanted to make that point. I don't want to dwell on this chapter, Anika, because Dave and I have talked about a lot of these things, but any comments at all?
No, I mean, whatever you call it, affirmative action, whatever, it is what it is. The people got to pay their bills and they got to come up with ways to do it. And I don't know how I feel, honestly, about it, but, I don't know.
Kind of the business realities of keeping a school afloat sometimes. No, I think you summarized it well. Like, it's not the most savory practice, but I don't want to be too judgmental about, like, if the other option is you close your doors.
Right, exactly.
It's hard to be, find fault with people, but it is something that we want people to know that does go on.
Right.
Okay, so we are picking back up with our conversation last week on the importance of character. Number 8, leadership. Leaders, that's often, there are a lot of schools that really look for that. That's huge when they see leadership. When I did admissions, we used a term that I don't hear very much anymore, but we called them pullers. What we called them? Pullers.
What was that?
Pullers?
Mm-hmm.
They have the ability to, like, influence. It's just another way of saying influencers, like, right? Like, they pull people with them.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
You know what I mean? So, like, if they want to start a chess club, they have the ability to get 10, 12 other people that want to be a part of it.
Okay.
They want to start a photography club or a cheerleading club, or, hey, we're going to start community service, or we're going to go down and work with the refugees in the area. Then they can influence 8, 10, 12 others to come with them. So we call them pullers, but that's extremely valuable in a assessment. Number 9, class participation. So this is someone who brings their voice, because now you're not only just personally getting an education, you are elevating the experience of everybody else, including the teacher. By the way, when teachers talk about that, that can be some of the things that can really differentiate who gets in and who doesn't.
Hmm.
If you're a teacher out there and you're writing a recommendation, please, and you got someone who contributes, please talk about that. And if you're able to say, this student challenges me sometimes with their thinking, it makes me prepare and me bring my A game. Schools just eat that stuff up.
Okay.
So I'm not going to do number 10 because we did a whole thing on it a few weeks ago, Anika. Number 10 is intellectual curiosity. I did a whole segment just on that. Remember that one?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So that was number 10. So we'll just keep moving on that one. But I would hang my hat a little bit here on number 11.
Okay.
So this is what I call unique perspective. So this is I'm pushing the definition of character a little bit because this is more of a background thing. This is somebody who brings such a unique perspective to the campus because they've had unique experiences themselves in their life.
Okay.
It could be anything from, let's say it's a really conservative campus, and a student maybe grew up with 2 dads or 2 moms. And they're like, oh, okay, you can help educate everybody else on what that experience is like. Or you went through homelessness for a time in your life. And it could be all kinds of things. It could be the student who moved around a lot and they lived in Africa and then they lived in Asia and then they lived in Europe. And it's like, wow. In fact, there's a student I worked with this last year, and I worked with her sister a few years ago, and she had lived for 5 years in Ghana. And so she wrote a lot in her writing about how Ghana was different from America. Mm-hmm. And I'm convinced that was an asset in her application. Like, she was bringing this perspective.
Okay.
And I want to tie this into something I said a few weeks ago when Dave and I were debating affirmative action. And, I was kind of thinking out loud in that conversation, and I thought about it after, and I said something that I want to retract. It was just kind of recording, but I was thinking out loud. I was trying to make the point that I wish colleges would not allow upper middle class kids to take spots away from more under-resourced kids and say, look, we're diverse. We're like 13% Black and we're 15% Latino and we're, 15% Asian. But all they really did was take privileged kids and pass over kids that have overcome some hurdles. And I was trying to make that point, but I overemphasized it. And one of the things I said is, I think we were talking about how affirmative action needs to be remarketed and needs to be retooled so that people can appreciate it more. And one of the things I said is, if it is a kid that's well-resourced and it's a student of color, I said they should be expected to have the exact same academic record as anybody else because they've been just as resourced. Okay. And we're talking mostly about test scores. Well, first of all, most of the time their scores are close. They're, I see the kids that get in that are privileged. If it's a highly selective school, they might have a 1500 SAT, maybe not a 1540. So that point wasn't that important. But then I thought about it afterward and I thought, wait a minute, why should they? Because what I was doing is I was accepting the fact that your test scores are the legitimate litmus test of value. And I reject that. It's a fundamentally flawed metric, making it one of the main things that you evaluate when you're evaluating somebody. If you're coming in and you're bringing a different perspective, if you've had the Native American experience or the Mexican immigrant experience or the inner city experience, or even you're coming from privilege, but you bring a different perspective, then that's something that's valuable, and you should not necessarily have to have the exact same academic criteria as the average, in my opinion. Okay. Because in the end of the day, it's not about a test score. I look at it very similar to like a company. When a company's hiring somebody, they don't say who had the highest test score. Right? They look at all kinds of other things. How are you going to get along with people? What are your skill sets? What's your integrity like? What are your leadership skills? How good are you at what you do? And now, a lot of times when we talk about race, people get their feathers up and they get defensive and they don't like it because they think, oh, these people are taking my spot. But let's take it outside of the context of race. Do you know who David Hogg is, Anika?
I've heard the name. Who is that?
So do you remember the shooting in Parkland that happened at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas?
Student activist.
Yeah. He's like probably the most famous male student activist that came out of that. So there was a lot of controversy when he got into Harvard because it became known that he had a 1270 on the SAT. Now, 1270 on the SAT is not Harvard. That's probably bottom 2% for Harvard, and most of that other 2% are going to be, very unique situations like star quarterback, board of trustees kids, the dad that can build the $40 million building, very unique situations.
Mm-hmm.
But I vehemently defended him. Look at the perspective he has.
Right.
Look at what he's been exposed to, and look at what others can learn from that. So that's how you build a community. You bring in people that have these unique perspectives. And that's why I look back at what I said about affirmative action, and I rejected what I said before. Because I was admitting test scores are legitimate as a way to prioritize who's admitted and who's not admitted. And I fundamentally reject that. I think it's extremely important that somebody's able to do the work. Okay.
Right.
But Hogg was a 4.0 student. And we know that GPA predicts academic performance way better than scores. So I wouldn't just admit him just because of what he observed and saw and could do if he couldn't do the work.
But certainly there's a tremendous amount of value in that in itself.
Correct. And so unique perspectives is extremely valuable. And that's why I want to correct what I said before. Because I was, I was adhering to a broken system, and I want to repudiate that. Okay. Number 12, servant spirit. Do you remember Montana Crider? I'm going to shout her out.
Of course, I remember Montana.
So Montana Crider is somebody that Anika and I both know. She's friends with your son. They're in the same class, weren't they?
Mm-hmm.
So she is one of my all-time favorite students that I've worked with since I've been in Atlanta. And I remember one time in the classroom, a student spilled a drink, and she immediately went to the teacher. That's okay, I'll get it. And she went and got a mop, and swept everything up. And I was so impressed with her. And I wrote about that when I did a recommendation for her. But it's that person that's like thinking, like, how can I help you? What can I do to help you? Cleaning the dorm or looking out, you see someone has got too many bags in their hands, and you go and you grab one, and, and it's just those little things. They elevate the culture of the community.
Well, it's interesting. I assume that you were going to start talking about volunteering as opposed to that.
But that's the same thing.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, like going out to seek out volunteer assignments, like going to organizations and serving as a volunteer.
So that's a little bit of adventuresome spirit that I was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But servant spirit is deeper than volunteering, because sometimes volunteering can be checking a box of a list. This is what I'm supposed to do, so I'm doing
exactly.
it. I'm getting toward the right attitude behind volunteering.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, behind volunteers. And anything else you want to say on that one, Anika?
Nope, that's good.
And then the last one, and this is the thing, if I had to pick one thing that I feel would win if admission officers, let's say there was a survey of 1,000 admission officers, and the question was posed to them. And the question was, what is your advice for high school students about the college application process? I think this would be number one. What do you think it is, Anika?
Advice for students?
Yep.
Be yourself.
These are college admission officers giving advice to 1,000 students in high school.
Be your authentic self.
You nailed it.
Oh, look at that.
You nailed it. You go, girl. Authenticity. And as I said, I'm going to read another quote. Robin Mamlet, one of my favorite admissions people. So here's what she says on this topic. This was when she was the dean at Stanford. She's not anymore, but she left that position. But this is what she said. Even more impressive than test scores or great transcripts or fantastic essays, colleges are looking for authenticity. Not the appearance of authenticity. Not the packaging of authenticity. Not the strategy of authenticity. Just authenticity. Plain and simple. So why is that? If we detect exaggeration or pretense or packaging, how do we know which parts of your application are real? Anyway. So be yourself.
Okay.
Any comments on anything, Anika?
Well, I think the big takeaway for me is, ending on that note, is that we're with your 13 points is not that we want the kid to be all of those 13 things. Right. Don't force yourself into those 13 traits.
Yep.
Just highlight those of which you are affiliated with. Make sure those are shine through your application, basically.
Well, one of my takeaways I want for people is I don't want you to think if you don't have these amazing scores, or if you didn't take every single rigorous class or you didn't ace your APs or everything, that there's still not some people out there that will value what you bring if you do have these characteristics.
Mm-hmm.
Because now, mind you, you can't be way outside of a school's academic profile. But this is one of the main reasons why, kids don't understand this. I mean, like, why did they take the number 9th kid in the class and they passed over the number 2 kid? Or why did they take the number 59th kid and they didn't take the number 21st kid if your school ranks? Or maybe they don't rank and they're like, man, they took this kid and this kid has like a 3.3, and like a 24 in the ACT. And then this other kid had like a 30 on the ACT and has like a 3.9. That's messed up. Like, this is the way kids talk because they have a tendency to think it's all about just academic factors. And one of the reasons why these things happen is because a lot of schools really, really value this, what I'm talking about, especially schools that have a high percentage of kids that live on campus and they're trying to have a certain type of residential community.
Mm-hmm.
So there's one last thing I want to close on. I don't know if you remember this, Anika, but I've often said to people, I can describe what colleges are looking for in 2 words. And then I have people guess. And then finally I tell them the words are positive impact. Well, Rick Clark, who's a friend of the show, been on our show about episode 50 and episode 100, director of mission at Georgia Tech. He puts it this way, and I like it. He says, you want to know what we're looking for? We're looking for the kid that will be really, really missed by their high school.
Oh.
And when you think about it, all of these character things, they create the kind of kid that really is missed when they leave their high school.
Oh. Okay.
So hopefully this was encouraging for people.
I think so.
I love bonus content. See you in 5 more weeks with another one. I already know what I'm going to do next time. I'm going to go talk about private versus public high schools. Which one is sort of easier, or is one easier to get into college? Like, is one easier than the other if you're looking at your college options?
Okay.
What factors decide whether it's easier to get in from a private school or a public school? So I'm going to try to tackle that one next time.
Okay. You just took Dave's preview thunder away.
No, that's 165. That's 5 weeks from now.
I
Nobody's
know,
got a
but
memory that
still.
lasts. No one's got a memory that lasts that long. Anika and I are so grateful for everyone who has financially supported our podcast. It allows us to pay our staff and cover our other auxiliary expenses involved in having a weekly professional podcast.
At the start of every month, we're going to start sending a special gift to anyone who financially supports your college-bound kid.
I will be sending our donors this bonus content once a month directly to your email. The bonus content will be between 10 to 15 minutes in length. Usually it will be a college-related topic that I'm passionate about. Occasionally, it'll be another bonus hot topic in the news segment. Sometimes it'll be an answer to a question that one of our listeners submits to us via email.
And you'll receive these monthly audio blogs for a gift of any amount. We know that $5,000 to one person is $5 to someone else, and we don't want your budget to be a hindrance to you receiving this additional bonus content. So if you want to support our show, just go to yourcollegeboundkid.com and click the donate button. And if you've already financially supported our podcast, you will automatically start receiving this bonus content via your email.
This bonus content is our way of letting our financial supporters know in a tangible way how much we appreciate you. And if you have any questions at all about our monthly bonus content, just send your questions our way. That's to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Once again, questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Just want to throw 2 more character traits in that are highly valued by colleges. And the truth is, this is not an exhaustive list, Anika. There are other things as well.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just sharing some of the things that I know are really important to colleges, and there's certainly some other things that I could share. But at 14, I want to share one, and then 15, I want to share my favorite one, which I'm going to save for last.
And this is when we're talking about your bonus content from last
Correct.
week around. Okay.
Yeah. So these are just, things that schools that do holistic admissions, they can really value a lot. It can make a difference between who gets in and who doesn't get in.
Mm-hmm.
And we talk so much about things like grades and test scores and AP scores and did you take this course or that course or what are your extracurriculars like? And I don't feel I'd give it enough attention to something that's incredibly valuable, which is who are these people that we're admitting? What is their character like? How will that impact our campus, and how will that impact them as citizens? Do we want to, is this the kind of person that we want to have as an alumni, that we feel will proudly represent our institution?
Mm-hmm.
And what type of character traits are some of those that make a student shine?
Mm-hmm.
So this is a kind of flies under the radar one, but it's creativity. Sometimes you see creativity in an applicant and it just makes them spark and spike. And so any ideas, Anika, how creativity might come through in an application?
I mean, vaguely, I guess, maybe around, creative ways. Oh, let's take this pandemic, for example, about how you went online and created some course, invited your peers to attend or something. I don't know.
No, that's an excellent example.
Okay.
One of the students I'm working with this year, he's very, 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 first of all, he's a really high-end student as far as he has all like the grades and all that stuff. He's second in his class of over 500 kids, and he has like the test scores and all that. But he's passionate about music. And he was extremely interested in attending a real high-level music conference for people that are really, really into composing.
Oh,
but then
you
it got
shared
canceled.
This one before. Okay, I remember. Maybe that's where I got that from. Okay.
Oh, maybe I shared it before. Sometimes I forget who. Sometimes I forget. Did I say this like at the student and counseling session or on the podcast?
We get new listeners every week, so go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, everybody. Sorry for being stale. But, he started this incredible online program for students that can't afford to pay for a conference. And he recruited the top faculty around the country. And they had a composers conference. That's creativity.
Right.
I have another student working with this year who I got off that fast after you threw that out there, by the way. I said, let me get over this one really. I don't want to quit in the middle. Let me get off it.
But we get it, though. And it is creative, though. So that's
yes.
That's the point, right?
I have another student I'm working with who's applying to Duke University. And for the essay, he did this dialogue back and forth with he and his mom. It's like, my mom says, why would you want to go to the Blue Devils? You've never liked their mascot, and then he comes back and forth. And he did the whole thing in the form of a dialogue. And it's just little things that like showcase your creativity.
Okay.
I remember when Dr. Lisa Ruff and I were talking about SLU, St. Louis University, for College Spotlight about a month ago. We talked about a program that started on that campus that spread to 40 campuses now, where instead of throwing out all the food that students aren't going to eat at the end of the day in the dining room, a whole ministry got started at gathering it up and delivering it to the homeless. So these are the kinds of things, like if they ever in applications, they can just really showcase creativity, and that can be valued. Any thoughts on that?
No, that's great.
And then the last one I want to hit, which is my favorite one, and it took me about 4 or 5 years into admissions till I realized, okay, if you have this secret sauce, then I'm going to fight for you at committee. So what do you think it is, Anika? Yes.
I feel like we already did those.
No, I've never revealed this, I don't think, before. Like, this was my favorite character trait, that if you had it, like, I was going to go to bat, I was going to fight for you. Like, this was the kid that I would take them with several hundred points lower SATs over someone who was higher because they had this. And
I put the likability on that one. I don't know.
So that is a really good one. That one's definitely up there. That's probably my number 2.
Okay.
Because like likability and ability to get along with a wide range of people, that was like my number 2. I'm going to give you a hint. It starts with the letter M.
M. Oh my
and it's about 10 letters.
Playing hangman.
And it ends in TION. Those are the last 4 letters.
Oh my God.
You want me just to spit it out? You done with the guessing games?
I mean, only thing I can do is matriculation, but I don't even know how many letters.
Yes, it was M and it was ION. But dang, just like Dave, I get the fun of dinging you over here.
Right.
The word is motivation.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Motivation. I learned, and I just kind of learned it actually by watching people like that would come in and I'd look at what they would do. And if people have drive, they just go really, really, really far. And I've kind of made a point now, because this is year 21 for me doing this. I've made a point of like looking at students, I was involved in admission process for them. Obviously, I can't track everybody. But Facebook's come in really handy because you can get in. I have a whole Facebook group for like my former students.
Yeah.
And I can, so you can go in and see like who's done what. And I tell you, if there's one thing that I notice that the movers and shakers have is motivation. Those kids had drive. It came through in all over their application.
Wow.
And then the number 2 thing would be like the people skill likability thing.
Okay.
So those are like my 2 biggest predictors, you know, of life success. And then now you do need to have integrity, because I've seen some people like get into really high positions and then, you know what I mean, they did something that terrible. Caused the whole thing to come crashing down because they took a little money out of the kitty or something, you know, just different things. So that's like my magic secret sauce: motivation and people skills with integrity. And then the sky's the limit. And so it took me like the first 4 or 5 years, because of really the way the mind works, I think. Sounds bad that I'm blaming it on this, but I kind of do. I was sort of like, you know, I was somebody like was putting a lot of emphasis on test scores and that, because it's just sort of the way the mind works. It kind of traps you into thinking, ooh, like you're at this number versus that number. And it's sort of hard to see the character through the numbers, especially when the numbers were soft.
Right.
But, you know, then over time I started looking at, well, you know what, some of these like high flyer kids with these incredible scores, they're kind of floundering. They're like bombing out. So that's clearly, it's not clearly about the scores. Right. But I feel bad for the first few years I did admissions. No, because one time somebody even confronted me. It was bad. Like, God, placement person. Like, yeah, I see what you're about. You're admitting the kids with the high scores, and you're like overlooking some diamonds in the rough that we're sending you. But it got me thinking. It worked.
Wow,
it was not good for that kid that didn't get in that year, but
right,
kind of changed me.
Well, you know, that makes perfect sense, because I promised Jalen that's how he got into Emory's AA program.
I'm sure.
Because his score, he did not have the highest score. You know, he kept taking that test. I
remember he was taking that GRE a lot.
Yes, God. But he kept going at them. He was showing them how he was putting in the extra work, and he was calling people, and he was just going. I mean, he was going.
I know Jalen. When he wants something, he goes for it.
And it was clear motivation. It was clear motivation. And he got that letter and was just like, oh, the heavens opened up. But
well, you know, but I'll say some other things that he has. I mean, he has the people skills, and I know that would have come through in his recommendations.
Yeah.
I guarantee that, you know.
But you're right. I feel like, but I do put his motivation first and his likability at number 2. I really do.
Yep. And if you guys ever, I know I said last week, you know, or maybe it was a couple of weeks ago, I said that, you know, Anika and Javon are so likable, and so are her kids. But she really does have special kids. Like, they've done an incredible job raising them. And
thank you.
In my 12, Anika, I tell people this, not when you're around. Like, I tell this to the leaders at KIP. I say, of all the students that I have ever worked with, I regard your son as the top male student at KIP.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
Just because of the combination of it's a combination of all of these things that he has, like incredible at relationship building, you know, and likability and motivation, and he's smart and he's hardworking. And he's just
cute. He's so cute.
And he's just going places. He's just going places.
I'm just kidding.
I'll leave the cute out of it. I'll let you do that one. But you know, yeah. And so I learned after time that I'm taking that kid over the kid with the, you know, the 800s and the perfect scores. Right. I mean, it's not like Jalen is a terrible tester, but
that's not it's definitely not his strongest suit.
No, he's like top 10% nationally. Yeah. But when you are talking about getting in a program like that at Emory, you know what I mean? You're swimming with the sharks.
Right, exactly.
You're in the big leagues with the high flyers.
Yep.
So good for him. Good for him. So anything else to say about the character?
No, I love it. And I'm sure people are taking all kinds of stuff from all 15. What do we do? 14, 15 points.
Yeah.
Because it does help to marinate on that, especially when we got these youngins in 7th grade and 8th grade and 9th and 10th coming on up. Just helping them build character is a job in itself. So it's something to keep on the forefront of your radar.
And you know what else I find that's encouraging? This is my experience when I talk to students about this, or parents as well. It can be hard if you're not that straight A student, you're not doing that in all those advanced classes.
Right.
That can be kind of deflating if you're sort of hearing like that's the secret sauce. You can be like, but that's just not who my kid is, you know?
Exactly.
But I feel like everybody sort of feels like they can work on these character traits. Like it feels like it's sort of a level playing field.
Yep.
And they can work on them. And so it's hopefully an encouraging message.
It is. It absolutely is. Thank you, Mark.
it's time for a question from one of our listeners. All right, Anika. I'm excited about this question that came in from Diana from Wisconsin. So you want to read it to us?
Yeah, let's see what Diana had to say. So Diana, what are some red flags when you're looking at a college that should signal to you that this is not the college for my child or me or whoever?
Yeah, I really love that question that came in. And this was one where I didn't, I couldn't go like pull a study out or anything like that. But what I did is I just sat back and I just reflected on all the different times that I've had parents or students tell me I visited and that is not the place for me. I also incorporated people that, also came around and said that they might have attended a school and it just wasn't really what they were hoping for. So I sort of incorporated people who chose not to go to school on a visit, as well as people maybe that didn't have absolute, best possible experience. I just sat down and just wrote and took notes. And so most of the people were people that chose not to go to school. Like they would visit and they would be like, no, this is not for me. And so I have a list of 10 here. They're not in order from number one is the most important. They're just 10.
Okay.
So let's go through them.
Okay.
So the first one I wrote down is if a school is just not affordable, it's just too expensive. That is a deal breaker. People make mistakes all the time where they end up committing to a school that's outside their budget, and usually they pay for it, pretty dearly in the form of loans for a long time, and they feel like they're in bondage. So occasionally I have people that do that and they don't regret it, but normally they do. But so that's number one. So pretty straightforward. Anything you want to say on money, Anika?
Well, I wonder about that because are you saying that they go and they, is there a lot of times that they drop out? Is that because, I can't get through the whole college experience because I can't afford it? Because they can go into debt and still enjoy the experience, right?
Yeah. So there's both categories here. There's people that, they really want to go to the school and then the numbers come back and they just crunch them and they just say, we just can't do this as a family. We're just not willing to go into that level of debt with that many parent loans. And you know what I mean? And so there's the people that choose not to go. And then there's the people that go and regret it that they did. So it's kind of both.
Okay.
All right, let's move on to number two. Cause I think number one is, I don't know. It's just depressing. So number two is a really big one. It's they just didn't jive with the kind of kids that were there. The way I put it is they didn't feel like they could see themselves there. Like they didn't see their tribe. At the end of the day, you're assessing if you can fit into a community. And that can be a lot of different things that could comprise that, right? It could be, this is really kind of a catch-all category. It could be the kids seemed they were too uptight, they were too tense, they weren't having fun. Or it could be they didn't really seem academically focused. Or it could be other things. It could even encompass diversity. I want diversity and I didn't see much socioeconomic or racial or ethnic diversity. Or I've had Jewish students, I don't see a large Jewish community there. I've seen that with a lot of my South Asian families I work with. I don't see, very many South Asians that look like me. It could be kind of any of that, but I just don't feel like my kind of kid is there. Any thoughts on that?
That makes sense.
All right. The next one is just the size just didn't feel right. It felt too small.
Or too big.
Or it felt too big. And most of these are things that you've been doing all this internet research and then you finally get to visit. And then you just don't have that right feel. It felt too small. It felt too big. So that's number three. Anything on that or just keep it moving?
Just keep it moving.
Number four was people aren't friendly. So it just the campus felt cold. It didn't feel welcoming. I didn't get that warmth vibe that I'm looking for.
Okay.
These are just, every year I have people that turn schools down for these reasons, multiple students. So these are really, really common.
So let me ask you this real quick, Mark.
Sure.
So are you, let's take away the pandemic and let's just say the time when we were visiting campuses. Are you saying that this can be discerned on one visit or?
Yeah, because normally you only get one visit,
right.
Especially if you're not going to a school locally in your area. I mean, there certainly are people that visit multiple times to schools that are at a distance, but that's not that common. I mean, if someone's doing a national search, so a lot of people I work with do national searches, they might get a chance to, you know, come in and visit one place because they got to visit many others. It's hard enough trying to get all your visits in.
Right.
Now, it's different. Certainly the person that's living locally and staying at home and wants to go to local school, you know, they might get a second or third visit in.
Okay.
But it's just that feeling that they pick up. They just don't pick up that warmth. It feels cold. It's definitely a deal breaker. These are things that cause families to say, this is not the place for me.
Okay.
Number 5 is reviews. Like, they start reading a lot of reviews and they don't like what they see and hear. Now, that could be lots of different things. It can be all these other reasons we've talked about. What it is about the reviews can be everything from crime in the neighborhood to academics. I mean, it just could be a lot of things, but they start reading reviews and they don't like what they see from the reviews.
Okay.
Number 6 has something to do with their major. So normally it's like it's one of two things normally. Like, they don't have the major that I'm interested in, or I've thought about changing majors, and, you know, I thought I wanted to do medicine, but now I might want to do international business, and I don't see us. Either they don't have it or they don't think the program is that strong. And I mean, normally that happens when they're thinking about changing a major, because normally, like, they'll cut a school out like right at the start if it doesn't have what they're looking for.
Okay.
Before they even get serious. But a lot of times people do change what they're thinking about, you know, and they change, and then they see, oh, that either they don't have it or the program is weak.
Okay.
The 7th one I wrote down is a bunch of things, but they don't like the graduation rate. They don't feel like, why is the graduation rate so low? Or the retention rate. Retention rate is based on the number of first-year students that return for second year. All those stats are public,
right?
You know, or sometimes it's even something in career placement, you know, related to career placement stats. But something to do with outcomes makes them question the ROI and the return on their investment.
Okay.
Any thoughts on that?
Makes sense.
The 8th one is distance from home. So, you know, like, they go through the process, and at the end of the day, they decide they want to be closer to home.
Right.
You know, that's normally what I get. Sometimes it's the school's too close to my home. I want to go away more. I get that sometimes, but more often than not, I just, you know what? And to be honest, like, this kind of happened to me. Like, when I was really young, I wanted to go to San Diego State because, I mean, the campus looked beautiful and the weather was warm. I'm a kid. I did. And then, like, as it got closer, well, I just don't know if I want to go to California. Like, you know, do I want to do the airfare thing all the time? And,
right.
You know, and that happened also believe it or not, for Karis. Like, Karis was, you know, she had like flying program to Scripps and she loved it. And we visited the Claremont colleges and she loved them and kind of was leading the way for her, actually. And then she said, you know, I just don't know if I want to go. Same, just like, I guess, like father, like daughter. It's the same thing. Love you, California, but, you know, this is 2 cases where someone said, just don't know if I want the 5-hour flight.
Right.
So she ended up doing the same thing on distance from home. And then Joy was getting actively recruited from Oglethorpe College to play basketball. They're coming to all her games. They invited us there multiple times. And at the end of the day, she's like, it's 48 minutes from my house. I just got to get farther away from you folks than that. So it can work both ways, you know, distance from home. All right. Number 9 is, and this one actually happens a lot. I'm going to say it all together, then we can talk about it. The campus felt either too urban, too suburban, or too rural. So it either felt like it was the middle of nowhere when I visited. I didn't see civilization around. That's not the vibe I'm looking for.
Oh, yeah, we did one of those. Okay.
See? Oh, you know, or sometimes, especially with big campuses that just blend into the city that don't have any natural boundaries.
Okay.
You know, like I want more of, like, you know, I just don't like how it just bleeds in and feels too urban.
I can see that.
Or suburban. So that's kind of that one.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last one is kind of similar, but it's just a little different. It's a little broader. So I just listed as didn't like the campus. Just didn't like the campus. It's a little broader because this can be like, you know how, like, shopping for a college in some ways is like buying a house. Like, there's a certain kind of vibe you're looking for, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times, the reason why I differentiated this from the urban, suburban, rural, like, sometimes I've learned that green spaces can be extremely important to students.
Hmm.
You know, and I know that because I actually have this questionnaire where I ask them to describe the campus they're looking for, and I just leave it open-ended.
Mm-hmm.
And so many of them start talking about green spaces.
Hmm.
And I get that, you know, trees and that nature vibe.
Yeah.
And then another thing that can really be important to people is architecture. I actually didn't realize how important architecture was, but a lot of people feel really strongly about wanting like a certain stone or brick or a certain kind of like look or vibe.
Mm-hmm.
And so just the campus just was not drawing me in. And so those are, to me, the 10 most common reasons why I find students say this isn't for me. Now, you know what one of the bigger ones is for parents besides money?
What's that?
If they're not comfortable with safety. Safety is huge to parents.
Yep.
You know, I have this on my parent questionnaire. I ask on a scale of 1 to 10 how important is safety and crime. And it gets a 10 so often, I've thought about taking it off my questionnaire.
Mm-hmm.
So every parent puts a 10.
Okay.
So that crime thing is, especially if it's their first kid to go away.
Yeah. Yeah.
And even more so if it's a girl.
Yeah.
So those are mine. Anika, is there anything that jumped out to you or anything that I didn't say that you would think you would have said?
Yeah, in terms of a red flag, no, I think you hit all of them. Safety, of course, you know, it's always going to be a biggie. But I do have to, you know, pivot back into the pandemic, even though we took it, you know, back to, okay, the days when we can go to campus and say, okay, that didn't work for me. So how different is it now or going to be? And I guess, but campus tours have come back, though. I guess at reduced capacity. But you're not going to get the same, or can you get the same? Or are we going to, do you think we're going to, well, you don't know the answer to this, maybe it's rhetorical, but are we going to get back to that same level of, okay, I went to this campus and I saw all of those 10 elements and either I liked or didn't like something about it?
I mean, I think what you're asking me, and correct me if I'm wrong, is how can, in a pandemic where you may not even get the chance to visit,
right?
Does that change anything about this?
Yep. That's it.
So what it does is it puts more pressure on you to do research, to do research the right way. You know, that's why I'm always talking about reading school newspapers and alumni magazines and looking at informal YouTube videos and all their social media and having actual conversations with students that are there. And that's why I brought the ZME CEO on, because, you know, these ZME groups are so powerful.
And there it is.
There it is. Let's transition to an interview with my friend Julia Esquivel. We had a number of people pointing out that they really enjoyed part 1. You're going to be in for a treat because there's several more parts coming. In part 2, we continue our conversation about the school profile. Julia talks about the difference between a school counselor and a college counselor. We talk about the growing trend for counselors to use bullet points instead of prose in their letters of recommendation. And Julia talks about some of the things that go into the college counselor letter. Listen and enjoy.
And now, this week's interview with a special guest.
Yeah, and I think you really nailed it, Julia, in terms of some of them could be as long as a book and some could be a page. There's so much variety, you know, because some of them will have things like AP scores broken down even by subject. You can see how many 5s, 4s, and 3s people got in different subjects. Some of them will have like where kids went to college the last 3 years or 5 years or whatever. Some of them will have, you mentioned the grade distribution, which we did that, which I always found really helpful as a reader. So you could see, oh, wow, okay, you know, only 2 kids got an A in this class. So then if someone has a B or a B plus, we need to look at that very differently because the school only gave out 2 A's. Or some schools will break kids down. They won't give you a ranking, but they may do breakdown by deciles or quintiles or quartiles. So they might say, okay, like, you know, a 397 to a 434 was our top quartile for a weighted GPA. And they might have different things like that. And so you can't really figure out, okay, this person was ranked number 6, but you can tell they were in this quintile, quartile, or decile. Are those all things that you saw fairly frequently?
Yes, when I worked at Haverford, we were a little more contextual than that, but that used to be the first thing we'd zero in on, is that if the student fell maybe outside of that top band, we'd want to dig in as to why. Maybe they really were a strong student and that top band, like the collegiate example I just used, is still really dang good.
Yes.
And then at some schools, it might not be it might be a simple calculation too. So it might be unfair to some of the students who might be just as strong, but somehow miss that decile or whatnot. And if you're interested, pretty much every school has their profile available for you. So you can either find it online or ask your guidance counselor, school counselor, what have you, and you can actually look at it yourself. And the school profile is updated every year. So it's particular to your graduating class, which is really important because maybe 5 years ago, our students took different classes and they got different SAT scores and they looked different than they do now. So it's updated every single year to sort of reflect what that particular class looks like as compared to other classes.
Yeah, and sometimes they might have some special curriculum thing, like let's say you have a winterim program or some, everybody does this unique capstone experience or something like that in order to graduate. They some of those kind of special features like that they might be in their profile. Now, from your experience, Julia, how often would you say you never got a profile? Because I do know there are some schools out there that don't produce them, or even that it's how often would you say you encountered that?
Pretty rarely, but it definitely happens. I also, as the director of multicultural recruitment, I would often actually recruit in the LA Unified School District. Almost all of them have school profiles, but the bandwidth that counseling staff has to update those and provide more information is really low. A lot of schools that service a lot of Indigenous and Native students are, especially if they don't have a ton of college-going students, might not have the need for a profile. So it definitely happened. And I can imagine if it was rare at Haverford, it's probably bigger, larger institutions who get a lot of different applicants from all over the world. So in that case, the secondary school report is helpful because I do get a little bit of a snapshot there, but I do think it's the admission officer's responsibility to gather as much information as possible to accurately read that student. You need to look at the context of that student. So sometimes at Haverford, we would go digging, actually. We would call the school and try to talk to the counselor just to try to get a sense because the student went through all that trouble of applying. So we should go through the trouble of reading them fully. That is a luxury, I think, at a small liberal arts school. I'm not sure every college can do that, but it does happen that the school profile is not present, and that's not held against the student. Just because I don't understand fully, how many APs you offer, what decile you're in, does not mean I'm not going to consider you as seriously as a student who has I think our school profile is a 4-pager, for example.
I want to go back to that collegiate example one more time because I think that not everybody might have caught what you were saying. I think it's important. So you look at a school like Haverford College, highly selective. The majority of more than most of the kids that they take are in the top 10% when there is rankings. However, a school like Collegiate is a highly, highly selective private school in New York City where kids that are getting in there are already in the top 5%. And so you're making the adjustment and saying, you don't need to be in the top 10% or top 25% or even top third of the class because we're going to take into context how selective it was for you even to get into the institution. Is that a fair way of putting it?
Absolutely.
Great. Now let's talk a little bit because, sometimes we'll use the term college counselor and sometimes we'll talk about a school counselor. Can you talk about what the difference is between a college counselor and a school counselor, and does that impact admissions in any way?
Great question. I think school counselors are the full-on heroes in secondary school education. So a school counselor will usually have more responsibilities and more specialized training than I do. The school counselor, beyond helping students apply to college, might also do things like administer testing, like the SATs or the APs, class placement. They also might do some actual counseling themselves, so help you out with where you are and connect you with services in terms of mental health. So they do about 1,000 jobs at once. I'm just not sure how they do it, but they're the real heroes. I am privileged enough that my sole focus in my job as a college counselor is helping my 40 or so students apply to college. I don't need to worry about some of those other things like class placement. We have a registrar for that. We have folks on my school campus that can actually do a lot of those things that a school counselor would normally do all in one. But I always say this to my students when they start to get nervous about admissions is I say, by having a college counselor, it's great. We can just focus on your college apps and whatnot. You are not at all disadvantaged if you have a school counselor. And in fact, colleges know that. So again, context is key. So they're not going to expect maybe a 2-page single-space letter from the high school, the public school counselor who has a caseload of 350 students, but they sure as heck will expect a very detailed letter from me. And that is what I should be doing as well. So that won't be held against you. It's just going to be, it's just knowing that some students come with more privilege in this process by virtue of some of the resources that usually they're independent schools is where you see a college counselor. But certainly there's some very high-powered public schools in the nation too that have the luxury of having school counselors as well as school counselors who are focused mostly on, college counseling. But you will not be at a disadvantage no matter who your counselor is. But the main difference sort of for college counselor and school counselor is really the amount of responsibilities and the roles they play.
And I'm really glad you elucidate that the way that you did, because the vast majority of people are coming from backgrounds where they don't have a college counselor. They just have a school counselor. And many, many times the alphabet is just divided up. And depending on what your last name is, that's who you're assigned. And, national average of 482 to 1. School counselors to students. And so one thing that I've heard you say at least 3, if not 4 times already today, Julia, is, we are going to do our best in admissions to try to eliminate the bias as much as possible and to try not to give preference to people that are coming from more privileged background. Actually, let me ask you a follow-up question on that. What are some ways you feel as if you tried really hard not to give preference to people that came from more privileged school environments?
Absolutely. Because it was very easy to read a 4-page letter from a student at an independent school and I would know everything about their family. And then a student maybe from the LA Unified who school counselor would even write, I'm sorry, I have a caseload of this. I'm not able to write on the student's behalf. Almost always, actually, the student with the school counselor in a public school setting, they actually fared better, if not just as well as the student in the independent school. So the first thing that I've done as a reader at Emory or Haverford is I look at the school first and foremost. We have to understand where the student is coming from. And so we try to gather data that might not come from the school counselor letter if it's not going to be able, if the counselor doesn't maybe have the bandwidth to write all of that extra information. So Haverford was lucky enough that there are interviews. We paid attention in high school visits and would write notes down about our interaction with the student, essays, even teacher recs, even if the teacher themselves. I remember we admitted a student at Haverford where the AP English teacher said, I'm not able to write a rec. I just don't have enough time. That student was totally admitted. There were other pieces of their application that could tell us more about the student as well. And it was our responsibility to go sort of finding those moments where we could learn more about them. And so the other piece is that, and I think this is not just true of Haverford, but I tell my students, because I work at an independent school, we advise all of our students to go early action, early decision, to be in some sort of early pool, because this is where all of those advantages that you've had get to come into play. You've had a counselor working with you for maybe a year at that point. Your essays are ready to go. You've done your interview. Someone has counseled you and held your hand to this point. And then when it comes to regular decision, that's when all the other students who didn't get all these advantages get to really get their time to shine. So I think a lot of colleges Not that they over-admit from independent schools in early or over-admit from more privileged students in early. It's more that they realize that there are certain barriers for certain students that are not present, perhaps at independent schools. And so colleges work to try to manage that and try to be sure that they are giving everyone a space at the table to sort of have their time to shine and whatnot. So it's not held against the student. It's just that the college will probably look in other places to try to find some more of that contextual information that might come in a counselor letter that might just be longer. And by the way, longer does not always mean better either. I know at Milton, we've been thinking about this a lot and how we actually, as an independent school, can contribute to this, what this divide can feel like. And so we made a conscious effort this year to reduce our letter to one page. Mm-hmm. And that everything that needed to be said could be said in one page. We didn't need to provide lots and lots of narrative. So that was one way we're trying to sort of help with that. But again, it feels like it feels like there's a difference between the school counselor letter or the college counselor letter and whatnot. But at the end of the day, it's about you as the student. And so that will come out in certain ways.
Yeah, I left Westtown in 2009, and we were already hearing from colleges then that they would like it if we would get it down to one page just to be sensitive to their reading load.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Friends, our recommended resource for episode 161 is the website collegevizzy.com. That's collegevizzy.com. Now, you've heard me talk over and over about taking advantage of the opportunity to do campus tours and virtual visits. But where do you find the virtual visits? Do you have to go to each individual website to find them? Do you have to go to YouTube to find them? Do you have to go to the Common App and look up the virtual visit on there? Do you have to do a Google search? How about having one source where you can find probably the majority of the colleges you want to visit? And that's collegevizzy.com. They have over 500 and growing all the time virtual college tours. And in addition to that, they also have some excellent mindful activities that are specifically suited to help you make the most of your college visits. That's collegevizzy.com. We'll now return to my interview with Julia Esquivel. Can you talk about, because we do have a lot of school counselors that listen, bullet points. So bullet points versus prose. As an admission officer reading, did it matter to you? Do you have a preference if you get bullet points versus a prose write-up?
So I think when I was still reading, the last time I read was 2016, and I only saw a few bullet point letters. If they are done well, and there's been a lot of workshops at national conferences, there's a lot of buzz about this. I actually foresee this taking on and being something that a lot of high schools will adopt. But the bullet point letter is actually a little more helpful. It doesn't mean that I'm going to list all your activities like you did on the activities piece. It means I'm not going to waste the reader's time with funny transitions in between my different narrative pieces for you. Some of the area high schools around us have actually gone to bullet point, and they actually divide their letter into sections. So one is personal qualities, and then there's a few bullet points that are very nuanced and very detailed, just doesn't have that whole narrative story around it. And maybe there's another section on extracurriculars, and it's not a list of them, but it's maybe the top 3 that are most important to the student and why they're the most important. And then maybe there's another section on academics, the full snapshot of the student in terms of all their academics, where I'm not quoting every single teacher they've had and talking about every course they've taken, but maybe identifying 1 to 3 themes within the student's academics that would really bring out the strengths of the student in terms of their academics. I love it. We were taking baby steps, but I think we might really try to do the bullet point letter soon. We have Milton is part of a professional group called IceCap, which is a lot of the boarding schools in the Northeast. And we have a counselor who's at Exeter who just came from USC. And he reminded us that, listen, it's a lot of, younger people reading applications. It's a lot of applications. I don't have time. I don't want to hear about how this student is like some esoteric Greek philosopher that I probably don't know about. I don't need those things. And in fact, a bullet point, I am going to get more information quicker and more effectively that way than in the longer narrative style letters. So I'm a big fan of it. And even this year, I could tell you that writing my letters took less time. I still prepared them in the same amount of time, but when it came down to it, I was able to sort of cut the fat, right? I'm like, oh gosh, I forgot to mention dance. Don't worry, dance is somewhere else in the application, Julia. I don't need to say that you were in the winter dance concert. So it really helped me realize what are the important pieces to the student that might be different than the other strong students a college is reading. And I think the bullet point letter will really get to that.
Yeah, I started doing it 2 years ago, and at first I felt guilty. It just felt like, you know what I mean? This isn't like proper King's English prose, but I really like it. I do it with the captions that you mentioned, and before I went that way, I did ask a lot of other admission officers what they felt about it, just sort of to get enough permission from them because they're the ones reading it, and I like it. So not to say that everybody has to do it, because I think, once again, the same point Julia's made, people aren't going to hold it against you how your college or school counselor presents the material. But for those who are listening out there, I would agree. It's definitely a trend that's picking up momentum out there.
Yeah.
So this isn't a full-blown session on recommendations, but I do have to ask you a question. What are your thoughts of examples, of the counselor sharing examples as opposed to just adjectives with superlatives? Did you like them? Did you not like them? What were your thoughts on having examples? Mm-hmm.
That's a great question. It has been different from each college I have worked for. So I'll be honest with you. I know Just Lord might be on this show, so I hope I'm not giving some secrets. But we used to, when it came to teacher recommendations, once the teachers started talking about the personal qualities of the student or the extracurricular pieces, we would actually cross that out and not read it. We just wanted to hear what the student was like in the classroom from the teacher. Mm-hmm. When it came to counselor recs, if the counselor just kept quoting teachers over and over, we would cross that out too, because I'm going to get that information in the teacher recs. And I know I've talked to some other colleges when I'm on the phone with them, where it's clear to us that some of the things that we include, for example, we used to include the AP scores just to sort of affirm them in our letters if a student was self-reporting them. That was totally something we didn't have to do, so we took that out. So what we have in terms of the shorter letter, what we've pivoted to is not abandoning examples, but having an overarching theme that we start the letter with, and then we use maybe supporting quotes that would be the best quote we can find in terms of the academic quotes. So, and it really characterized the student as a student in that one quote or maybe two quotes. Same from maybe a coach or something like that, or an art teacher if the student was an artist. So I think examples are very helpful, but I do know that some colleges would like it just in our words. They don't want more of these sort of quotes, but examples are very helpful. So that contextual information, like, yes, they do community service, but what is that altruistic spirit you're talking about? Give me an example. So your counselor is likely always spying on you in some weird way as a student.
No pressure.
Yeah, it's those little moments sometimes. So, like I have a faculty sponsor for a student group that focuses on body positivity. And little did one of the seniors know, but I thought what they were doing and how they were leading the group was so fantastic. I wrote to her counselor about it. That went in the letter, right? And that was a real life example we witnessed about something she did, instead of just saying, oh, it's great that she heads up this body positivity club that empowers young women. So I think just putting, we always tell the kids in the essays, show, don't tell. So we try to do that in our letters. So examples are helpful, but we're also careful not to oversample quotes and things like that.
Love it. Love it.
Next week in the news, while many colleges are making big cuts, a few opt for permanent transformation. An article by John Marcus of the Hechinger Report. Mark and Anika will continue their bonus content section on character traits admission officers value. Our question from a listener is, my son attends a competitive high school where there is a lot of pressure to attend a prestigious school. Should he tell others where he is applying or keep that to himself? Our interview is part 3 of 6 with Julia Esquivel, the Milton Academy College counselor, on how to work more effectively with your school counselor. And our college spotlight is the University of Utah.
See you next week, BIPOC.
You got it, Mr. Tupac.
And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. Your College Bound Kid is produced by Dave Vasaya of podcastengineers.com. If you find this podcast helpful, it would help us tremendously if you would subscribe and write us a review on your favorite podcast listening station. And please be sure to click the share button and send this to someone you know that can really use this information. The amazing music that you hear is by Victor Allen Weeks. Our image editor is Tauha Khan. Webmaster is Stalianos Dimitru. And marketing designs are by Kimberly Blass. And if you want to get a copy of the book, 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions, you can go right to 171answers.com. And if you want to have a college coaching session with Mark, you can send him a text to area code 404-664-4340. And if you have a question or a few questions that you would like to ask us, and we'll include them on the show, you can just email us at questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Every week, we'll take one question and include it in the episode. We don't like your questions. We love your questions. So send them our way. And by the way, check out our website, yourcollegeboundkid.com. Again, we thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to meeting with you again next week.